Welcome to Lake Bethel. My name is Sherwin. I'm the pastor here. Welcome to our video audience also. And video audience, if you want to know more about us or you want to support us financially, just go to lakeandbethel.org and you'll find information there to do that. So those of you who know me know that I have two sons, and one lives here in Michigan, in Muskegon. He was at the first service today. My other son lives in Salt Lake City. And I get there probably once a year. Usually end up getting caught in a snowstorm or something going there. But Salt Lake City is an interesting place. The population of Metro Salt Lake City is about like Grand Rapids, and half of the people that live there are practicing Mormons. Not all, but about half. In the smaller towns, the percentage is much higher. But in the city itself, it's about 50-50. Which makes it interesting because practicing Mormons are supposed to forego the use of alcohol, which makes it real interesting because all the liquor stores have back doors to them. It's really quite an interesting place to be. And they're also supposed to not partake of caffeine, no coffee or tea. They can have Dr. Pepper and Mountain Dew, but not coffee or tea, which is kind of an interesting thing. So what has happened is you get all these soda drive-through places that have come up all over Salt Lake City. One of them is called So Delicious. And of course, in my curiosity, I had to try one time. I went in, I didn't do the drive-through. I wanted to see what they had inside. They had a special that day of Dirty Dr. Pepper. I thought, oh, what in the world is Dirty Dr. Pepper? And it was $4, which almost made me think, come on. But I had to try it. So I did. And I watched them make it. Dirty Dr. Pepper is just regular Dr. Pepper with a shot of half and half in it. And I watched them make that, and I thought, that's got to be nasty, but I'm going to try it. And it was actually pretty good. I might have to have another one of these days. But then they also have coffee shops for the non-Mormons. And they've sprung up all over the place. One that caught my attention right away was a chain out of the West Coast called Dutch Brothers. Of course I had to try that. So one year when we were there, we had gone to see some of the national parks. I had gotten stopped for going 35 miles over the speed limit in a school zone, and the guy let me go because I don't have a record, and I said I wasn't paying attention. He let me go. But so it was after all that, we're dead tired, and I said, let's go get some coffee. So I had 6 people in my van. There was a long line at this place, and we put in our order. And the gal that came out to bring us the coffee says, is this your first time here? And I go, yeah, it is. Well, then it's on us. First-time visitors get free coffee. And I thought, well, that's really generous, and I'm going to go back. And this time I'll have to pay for it, but they're really generous. And if you go there once a week, you get a little card you can punch, then you become a member of what they call the Dutch Mafia. And that's hence your bulletin cover today. But that's what they do. I'm going to go back because they're generous. We all like generous people. Now, I've told a story about generosity a few years back, so if you remember this, I apologize in advance. But it's a story about a priest and a rabbi and a pastor. And they all walk into this cafe that has a special on chicken and dumplings. So they all sit down to this big plate of chicken and dumplings, and there's flies in the place. So a fly lands on the priest's chicken and dumpling. Now, he's of Irish descent. Had a short fuse too. They said, there's flies on this, and he shoved it to the waiter and said, I need a fresh one. And he got it. Well, then a fly landed on the rabbi's chicken and dumplings. The rabbi's just happy to be able to eat there because chicken and dumplings are kosher by nature. So he sees the fly sitting in there and the gravy stuff and takes his spoon and carefully goes underneath the fly, picks it up, and then just flicks it onto the floor and goes about eating his stuff. A few minutes later, there's a Reformed church pastor, it's the other one, of Dutch descent, and a fly lands in his chicken and dumplings. So what does he do? He wasn't going to order another plate. He carefully reached down and picked the fly up by its wings, held it over the plate, and shook it. And then he looked at the fly and he goes, "Now, spit it out." Sometimes we can be a little too frugal. But I remember hearing stories about that. My parents were raised during the Great Depression. And when my mom and dad got married, they took over the house that my grandparents had lived in. My grandma had a cook stove where she cooked everything on a wood-burning stove. She did that until she bought a house in town and moved there. But my mom wanted to replace that cook stove right away. She said, "I want an electric oven." And so my dad, of course, being obedient, went and got her an electric oven right away. But my grandma just didn't like that at all. She says, "That thing's going to make you go broke with all the electricity it's going to use." So they actually got a second electric meter so they could measure how much current this electric stove was going to use. And apparently it was on there for about 6 months, and then they got rid of it and just got used to it. But that was how concerned they were about economics. And you can't blame them. During the Great Depression, of course, farmers always had food, but things were tough for everybody nationally. And, one of the remnants of that is out there, the water is kind of difficult to get to. We always had a well, and the wells were quite often 100 feet deep. And so the water had a high mineral content. It tasted terrible, and it wasn't good to bathe in. So just about every farmhouse had a cistern beside it, and the gutters, when it rained, would take the rainwater and put it into that cistern, and that's what you used for bathing and washing clothes. You had separate plumbing for it and everything. And I remember having to take a bath on Saturday night. It's the only time all week long we had to take a bath. But we were farmers, you don't pick up any aromas that way. So, but the bathtub could have like this much water in it. And my sisters got to bathe first. So I always got to sit in this gray water and take a bath. Fortunately, things changed, and they even let me take a shower later on. But that was how it was done, and because if that cistern ran out of water, you had to have water delivered, and that was just way too expensive. I don't know if any of you have ever had a cheap boss, but if you've ever worked for somebody who was particularly stingy, somebody who tries to pay you as little as possible and then makes you feel like you don't deserve that, it's not much fun to work for somebody like that. And I've done that. So I know a little bit about what it is. And then if you've ever had a generous boss, you know what that's like. You're going to leave, and he goes, "Oh, just round up to the next hour. That's all right." And gives you generous tips. One of the bosses that I had let me drive his Cadillac when he went out of town. It was fun to work for him. He gave bonuses, and he bought me supper. I had one boss that every Friday night bought me a steak supper for a while. Those are people you like to work with because they're generous. Now, of a stingy boss or a generous boss, which one are you more likely to go the extra mile for? And of course, you're going to do that for the generous one. It's a principle of the universe. It's a biblical principle that stinginess begets stinginess. And so if you are a cheapskate, people are going to treat you differently than if you're generous. Because generosity begets generosity. And people like generous people. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at 2 Corinthians 9, where Paul talks about this, and it actually makes quite a bit of sense in our situation and for all time. But he says this, remember this, A farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. Makes sense. Don't skimp on the seed. Make sure there's plenty of it. When I was a kid of about 11 or 12, that was one of my jobs, was to bring seed corn to my dad who was planting. And it was kind of fun. I'd come home from school and he'd say, yeah, at 4 o'clock I need another load of seed. He had a Chevy 20, 3/4 ton pickup with the manual transmission in it, and I got to drive it on the road at 11 or 12 years old. But this is rural Iowa. The nearest paved road was 3 miles away. So there wasn't a lot of traffic out there. But I thought I was so cool driving that pickup. I had to stand up to get the clutch in. But I got to drive the seed corn to the field, and I thought, boy, I'm really just the man here. Today, the insurance companies would have a heart attack. But the point is that the seed has to be planted in order to get the crop. And my dad was very meticulous about that. Diane's dad was also very meticulous about that. The rows all had to be perfect and straight. And Diane will tell the story of her dad riding around on a Sunday afternoon looking at his fields of corn and saying, my, that's a good looking field of corn. So they really took pride in that. And I guess that was all right. But the point is that you need to put the seeds in to get the crop. And Paul goes on with this timeless principle. He says, you must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully. So you decide ahead of time how much you're going to give away. Now, I budget that. I handle the finances at our house, and we've been doing this very strictly about as long as we've been married, and it's worked for us. I'm a fan of Dave Ramsey's stuff, some of it, not all of it, and his suggestion is 10% off the top, which is quite a bit for some folks, but it's worked for us for a number of years. And what I'll do, because our income can vary so much from month to month, if you're married to a nurse, you know how that works. So what I do is I look at the income from the previous month and then make that into a tithe, divide it by 4, and write checks and put it in an envelope, and then that's what we put in the plate every Sunday. But 10% sounds like an awful lot for some folks. I say, well, then start with 3% and maybe bump it up to 5%. The thing is, give cheerfully. That's a good way to give. Or I prefer to use the word to give gratefully, because you know that it is God who provides you with the ability to earn money in the first place. So that's how I work it. Now, Paul goes on with this, says this, and God will generously provide all you need. Then you'll always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. So you make these plans. I know a little bit about estate planning because I helped my dad with that. And when he died, I realized how important estate planning is. Now, I'm the executor of the estate because my dad, of course, it had to be one of his boys. The girls couldn't do it. And my brother I'm a better money manager. And if you're watching this, Brian, sorry, you're a better farmer than I am. But the thing is that, I got that task and I've seen how important it is. But what Paul's essentially saying here is that God blesses those who use their resources to help those he wants to help. So we're all called to be good financial managers and make this happen for people who are less fortunate than us. And he does bless. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Paul goes on and says exactly what I've been thinking my whole life, is that God is the one who provides the seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. In the same way, he'll provide and increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity in you. Again, this is a reminder of where life comes from. the fact that you're alive, that you can produce, that you can actually make money, is all a gift from God. My somewhat limited ability to write sermons is a gift from God. The ability to drive to work and do it is a gift from God. The fact that you're healthy enough to produce comes from God. And so it makes sense for us to be grateful for this. Now Paul goes on. Yes, you will be enriched in every way, so that you can always be generous. That's quite a statement. And when we take your gifts to those who need them, they'll thank God. So two things will result from this ministry of giving. The needs of the believers in Jerusalem will be met, and they will joyfully express their thanks to God. See, Jerusalem had an issue of poverty for the early Christians there. First generation Christians, they were so happy about it. They were so happy about this command of Jesus to love God and love others as yourself, that they pooled all their resources. They sold their property. They put all their money in a big pot and just distributed it, kind of an early communist experiment. But then they went broke, and they were starving and dependent on other churches to take care of them. I had a buddy like that, went to college with him. Laketon Bethel actually supported him some years ago. His name was Carl Schell, and he was a good guy. He's independent missionary to South America. And he did a lot of good, but he managed his money terribly. And if you'd give him money, he would give it all away, every penny. And then at the end of the month, he couldn't pay his bills. So he'd come to me and say, can you help me out with that? And I'd say, well, I'll help you once, but you got to get your act together here. Well, he never did, and when he died a few years ago, he was absolutely broke, and his family had to chip in to pay for his funeral because of bad money. But he kept saying, well, God's going to provide. And I said, yeah, well, I'm not God, so why are you coming to me? You know? But he just didn't get that you have to be a good manager of your resources. God, I'm sure, wants us to take care of ourselves so that no one else has to, if that's possible. He calls us to be a producer, not a consumer all the time. So I'm sure Paul had some interesting discussions with the leaders in Jerusalem over that. Now, as this passage goes on, it says this: as a result of your ministry, they will give glory to God. For your generosity to them and to all believers will prove that you are obedient to the good news of Christ. And they will pray for you with deep affection because of their overflowing grace God has given to you. Thank God for this gift, too wonderful for words. So here you see Paul saying a little different way. He says, generosity is obedience. And that when we report for duty, being generous is just a part of that. When Jesus taught us this law of love, well, he's asking us to demonstrate that with how we allocate our resources. It's really kind of an amazing thing. And this principle is all through the Old Testament too. In Proverbs chapter 11, we see this, where it says, give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper, but those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Dave Ramsey talks about that, how if you go around with your fists tight, you can't receive anything. But if your hands are open and you're generous, you also can receive. It's just a principle. It's kind of a law of the universe. Generous people usually get more to be generous with than those who are not. And stingy people get less to be stingy with. And that's just kind of how it works. Now, there's exceptions, of course. When I was at ORU, I did some interesting things with that. I was there at the time the Colombian cartel was gaining power. And they were teaching this thing about how, okay, if you do what you're told you're going to be healthy and wealthy, because wealth is a sign of God's blessing. So this dumb freshman from Iowa raised his hand. He says, excuse me, he preferred to be addressed as President Roberts. I was wondering, God must really like cocaine, because he seems to be blessing the Colombian cartel with billions of dollars. The response was, next question. And then I got to visit the dean. So there's exceptions to this rule. But in general, it is true. And I've personally found this to be true. And if you're generous and you can refresh others, you yourself are automatically refreshed. And I've come to believe that refreshing others is part of our ministry as followers of Jesus. Now, William Barclay, who I believe was the best New Testament scholar of the 20th century, he died 20, 30 years ago, listed 4 reasons why people usually give. And the first of those is, well, it's a duty. It's like paying taxes. You know, it's just something you have to do. And I've known people who give for that reason. The second one is self-satisfaction. It feels good to give. So you're feeling bad, you want to feel good, you give. And it makes you feel good for a while. Third reason is prestige. Buildings and parks named after them. You know, Hackley Hospital, DeVos campus of Grand Valley, that sort of thing. You give because, you know, you want the prestige of being able to do it. The fourth reason is a good reason. Desire to serve. You give because you are reporting for duty. It's just something you do because you want to serve in the best, most powerful way possible. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, who was a contemporary of George Washington, so running around in the 1700s, he said this. He said, earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. In other words, be as generous as possible without being irresponsible. He taught that if you give 10%, you got 90% left to take care of your own needs, and you won't miss the 10%. You'll be blessed for what you give away. Now, my personal method on that, I do the finances at our house, and Diane does the laundry. She got a bad deal because the finances don't take near as long as the laundry. But the thing is that I set this up so that she has a check to put in every week. And that works for us. When we were raised that putting a check in the collection plate every Sunday was an act of worship. And it's just something that you do. Now, my kids hardly know what a check is. Our youngest has a checking account, but no checks. She uses those little cards or whatever, and Venmo, and things like that. And if you want to give that way, we appreciate it. There's, you know, the little cards in the chairs that show you how to do that. Just a few clicks and you can do that. It's just not my way of doing things, but it's probably a lot easier to do it that way. The bottom line is this: the church needs money to operate. That's just a fact. And I always tell people we have plenty of money. It's just that it's in the wrong pockets. We need to get it in the church's pockets sometimes. And I want to use my resources in a way that benefits this church and this community. But I can't use gimmicks to raise money. Now, no one is getting rich off of the local church. No one is. But it still takes $500,000 a year to run this place. It still has to be raised somehow. So I don't want to put pressure on anybody or trick anybody into giving. I'm just going to honestly say we need $500,000 a year to keep things going here. We were behind by about 40 grand as of the last board meeting. Now that deficit's been reduced because we've had some really generous gifts have come in. But I want to just remind you that's what it takes. So I want to grow in my generosity, And I want that for everyone. So let's report for duty, even with our checkbooks or debit cards or Apple Pay or whatever it is you're using. Then remember this principle. This also found in Proverbs chapter 3. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce. Then he will fill your barns with grain, and your vats will overflow with good wine. Unless you're a Mormon, then it's soda. But you see the principle here. You understand it. This is how God operates. And he's looking forward to an opportunity to operate that way with you and with me. Let's pray together, shall we? Lord, continue to open our eyes to the blessings that you have for us. And as always, give us the courage to report for duty with every part of our lives. Amen. Now to our video audience, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.